Good morning. I'm Denise Flight from Brazil. It's a pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ugur. He is the founding director of the Center for Research and Practice for High Ability Education and professor at Anadolu University in Turkey. He's currently a visiting professor at Western University in Canada. Dr. Ugur is the founding editor of the talent journal formerly known as the Turkish Journal of Giftedness and Education. He is the editor-in-chief of the Gift Education International, an executive board member of the Asia-Pacific Federation on Giftedness, and a member of the qualification committee of the European Talent Support Network. He has published books, chapters, and articles in Turkish and English about gift education, creativity, and intelligence. He's the author of a number of original models such as Anadolu Intelligence Scale, Creative Reversed Act, and Creative Scientific Ability Test. Today, he'll talk about his most recent work, The Fuzzy Conception of Giftedness. The World Council for Gifted and Talented Children would like to thank Dr. Ugur and the Jody Mahoney Center for Gift Education at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock for sponsoring this keynote speaker. So let's welcome Dr. Ugur. Post any question you may have for Dr. Sack in the chat. We'll try to ask him some of the questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for introducing me. It's a pleasure for me to make a speech at World Conference, which is one of the most prestigious conferences in our field. Today, I am going to be talking about some debates on conceptions of giftedness and the current model that I developed. The outline of my presentation will be just like this. I will talk about first ontological analysis of the concept giftedness. I will discuss some problems in conceptions, and then I will present fuzzy conception of giftedness. And at the last part, I will make some recommendations for the identification and education of gifted students based on this new conception of giftedness. Here, if you look at the concept of giftedness from an ontological point of view, it's a product of a culture. Actually, it's ingrained in artifacts, social facts, and ment facts. It's ingrained in artifacts because such as technologies and arts that humans create kind of show a sign of giftedness for us. It is a social based on social facts such as governments, organizations, associations, and the like. For example, the definition of giftedness made by the National Association for Gifted Children in the United States is widely accepted around the world. But it is also actually based on Mentifact, which I want to focus more on this concept. Mentifact first was coined by Huxley as a mental construction of societies that provide psychological frameworks of a culture. The concept giftedness is also a Mentifact, not a biofact, because it is framed in people's mind. But here, more important is the Mentifact system, which again Huxley defined as the sum and organizations of mental effects of a culture. So we can apply this concept in in the construction of the concept giftedness. So we can propose that giftedness is the sum of mental facts and the way they are organized. For example, let's take two examples from our field. One is the three-ring conception proposed by Renzulli, and the other one is differentiated model of giftedness and talent proposed by Francis Ganet. So here, these models or theories differ not only in the number of components they propose, but also they differ in how they organize components to define giftedness. For example, in three-ring conception, there are three components, major components. The intersection of these components define giftedness. On the other hand, the MGT looks at the concept giftedness differently. It offers different kinds of natural abilities that go through some learning process and then transpose into specific talents in specific domains. Here, accepting giftedness as a mental fact, we will have some issues in the conception of giftedness. These are the widespread issues, problems that we have had in the last century and even now. I will talk about four problems in conceptions of giftedness. You might define these problems or issues. It's up to you, actually. Threshold, composition, conditionality, and typology problem. Let's look at the first problem. That is a threshold problem, which is can be explained actually by an old paradox, which is Sorites paradox. This Sorites paradox refers to vague concepts such as giftedness that with a borderline range of application. There is no clear line between what is true or what is not true. Here, I should ask you three questions. For example, how many hairs make me not bald? How many hairs lost make me bald? Or how many grains make a heap? These questions are very famous among philosophers who study Sorites paradox. This paradox can be applied in gifted education. We have the same problem actually. Here, according to some theories, models of giftedness, or according to some practices around the world that government or institutions, do, people can be students can be accepted as gifted based on their IQ scores or based on some percentile rankings. For example, the widely still the most wide practice is 130 IQ defines a child as a gifted, or 2%, 3%, 5%, whatever. Here, this according to Sorites paradox, if someone a child with 130 IQ is gifted, how about 129? So does one IQ point make a significant difference in intelligence level of a child? Then according to Sorites paradox, it doesn't actually. If 1 point doesn't make a significant difference, then 128 IQ, a child with 128 IQ is also gifted. And a child with 127 IQ is also gifted, and it goes on just like that. But we can start from the back, from the reverse. A child who has 100 IQ is accepted as average. But we assume that 1 point doesn't make a significant difference in the level of intelligence, then a child with 101 IQ is also average. And then a child with 102 IQs is also average, and it goes to 130. Then we will accept that a child with 130 IQ is also average. Well, this psoriasis paradox is a big problem in gift education. There is one research that was done a couple of years ago by McBee and Meckel, excellent research, I believe. They compared the definitions of giftedness and applied this to identification. This is what they found when they used different cutoff scores, just like 1%, 2%, 5 or 10%. And different combination rules such as and or and more than one domain, the range of giftedness changes from 0.65% to 87%. So there is really a vague conception here. Our second problem is composition problem. Here we will see in conceptions of giftedness different components, different number of components, and different hierarchy of components. In some conceptions of giftedness or theories of giftedness include 2 or 3 components only. Some has more than 2, 3 components. And in some theories, creativity is a major component. In some, it is not actually. But in some theories, components are hierarchically organized. In some, there is no hierarchy in the components. So this shows that the structure of giftedness, according to theories and models of giftedness, is rather vague too. Our third problem in conceptions of giftedness is the conditionality problem. Most theories, actually almost all theories of giftedness, propose necessary conditions for giftedness. But at a first glance, conditionality may be simple, seem to be simple to solve. But in the cases of contingent conditions and plurality of causes, it is actually much more complicated. For example, initially an unnecessary condition becomes a necessary condition due to a contingent choice. Let's look at some definitions of or conceptions of giftedness. Take one example. Here, let's say one theory of giftedness proposes creativity as the necessary component of giftedness, just like the 3-ring conception proposes. Here, it is a contingent choice, actually. When we choose creativity as the necessary component of giftedness, then we should also look at what subcomponents of creativity has and what subcomponents these subcomponents has. For example, creativity also has a component which is non-conformity, which is also accepted as a necessary condition, necessary component of creativity. So non-conformity indirectly becomes the necessary component of giftedness. So how many people will accept that non-conformity should be a component of giftedness, actually a necessary component? And the second, here we have another second problem. Contingent propositions possibly true in some worlds and possibly false in other worlds. So here take the non-conformity again as an example. Here, non-conformity may have some value in some cultures, but how about in some other cultures? Here, non-conformity became a necessary condition due to a contingent choice, and there are some worlds in this world. Non-conformity is a life-threatening condition. So how can we possibly define non-conformity in those worlds? That's another problem. The fourth problem in our field in conceptions of giftedness is the typology problem. Here, vagueness in relation to types and domains of giftedness. If you look at the conceptions of giftedness, we will see many different types and domains. But the problem is here, what is the line? We've been talking about borderline cases because of this psoriasis paradox. Here we'll see intellectual, social, and artistic domains in the multidimensional model of giftedness, which was proposed by Sanford Cohen. And in Ganet's model, we have intellectual, creative, social, perceptual, physical components or types of natural abilities. In Sternberg's model, there are 7 patterns of giftedness: analyst, creative, practitioner, analytical, creative. For example, what is the line between analytical creator and analytic practitioner? So we don't have a clear line which type is which type. Okay, after talking about some conceptual problems in gifted education, now I want to introduce you the fuzzy conception of giftedness that I've been working on it. Of course, when we develop a model, we keep working on it. According to this new model, giftedness can be defined as a set of developing dispositions manifest in interactions, efficient interactions with stimulus conditions. Here we have 3 major components in this model: dispositions, stimulus conditions, which define environment, and interaction between dispositions and stimulus conditions. Dispositions define the person here. Let's look at the dispositions first, personal dispositions. In the model, in the theory, dispositions are internal characteristics of a person. This could be typified as intellective, such as reasoning, working memory, and non-intellective, such as self-concept, motivation, test commitment, and the like. The first proposition related to the dispositions is dispositional properties of giftedness are ascriptions. Here, according to John Locke, all dispositional properties are secondary, but he looks at properties, dispositions as primary properties and secondary properties. So there are primary properties of an object and secondary properties of an object. The size or shape of an object is primary property. But for example, the color of an object is not a primary property. We can see the primary properties such as shape, but also we see the color, but it is kind of different. So the primary properties are the perceptions that secondary properties are the perceptions that primary properties cause in us, in our perceptions. Let's have an example to make this case clear. We said the color of an object is a secondary property, not a primary property. Let's say there is a wall, a red wall out there. When we turn off the light, you will not see the color, but the wall is still out there. So what is happening here is when some primary properties of an object interacts with light under some certain conditions, it makes us to see the wall as red. But when the light is switched off, we cannot see it. Giftedness is the same, actually. So we ascribe some behaviors, in this case, dispositions, as gifted. So the consequence of accepting this proposition is this: giftedness is not a property of a person. It is our reaction to manifest dispositions or behaviors. The second proposition related to dispositions: dispositions have causal relevance to their manifestations. Here, the dispositions included in the FCG model is sort of canonical dispositions, which is defined by Choi as X would manifest M if it is exposed to C at T. Well, it could seem a little bit confusing here. Let me explain this. Canonical dispositions exhibit their typical manifestations in response to being situated in corresponding stimulus conditions. For example, when we say this child is gifted, this child must show giftedness upon being exposed to a stimulus condition during a time. Let's say a student at an art school in her last year of finishing the school. The stimulus condition for this student could be creating a unique style of arts. And the environment here, of course, art school, full with many artists and stimulations with arts. And the manifestation of giftedness should be the creation of the unique style of art. Here, the consequence of accepting this proposition 2 is giftedness can be explained in terms of manifest properties in stimulus conditions. And there exists no such thing as hidden gift in a corresponding stimulus condition, because we assume that the corresponding stimulus condition is sufficient enough to stimulate, to activate giftedness. The third proposition, a disposition for giftedness can be stimulated by a multiplicity of diverse stimulus conditions. Here, personal dispositions are multitrack that can be stimulated, activated by many stimuli or stimulus conditions. So according to Wetter, multitrack dispositions correspond to more than one pair of stimulus condition and manifestation. Then, if giftedness or the personal dispositions can be stimulated by numerous stimulus conditions, then there are multiple possibilities for manifestations of giftedness. The third proposition, intellective and non-intellective dispositions are equally necessary in the construction of giftedness. Here, FCG is markedly different from other models' theories of giftedness. In many theories of giftedness, non-intellective dispositions are considered as mediator for giftedness, but actually it is not, according to FCG. If the manifestation, let's try to prove it by the rule of logic. If the manifestation of an A, such as giftedness, entails the existence of conditions B, such as high intelligence, and C, such as motivation, then conditions B and C are equally necessary for the manifestation of giftedness. Here, let me repeat it, the consequence of accepting this proposition is non-intellective dispositions are not mediators or catalysts. They are necessary components of giftedness. The fifth proposition, the number and magnitude of dispositions necessary for the manifestation of giftedness is indeterminable. Because we don't even know the number of dispositions, personal dispositions necessary for the manifestation of giftedness, but dispositions also have sub-dispositions, sub-dispositions. So it is really, at the moment, impossible to estimate the number of personal dispositions necessary for giftedness. For example, we cannot say creativity, intelligence, motivation, and the like are necessary and sufficient for giftedness. On the other hand, each personal disposition contributes differentially to interactions with environment under a multiplicative model. Because FCG is based on interactionist model, here interaction is very important. According to Simonton studies, for example, dispositions have veto and compensation qualities. So On the one hand, each disposition differentially contributes to the manifestation or development of giftedness, but also they may have veto and compensation qualities. If one of the disposition is very weak, another highly developed disposition can compensate this disposition. Or if one of the dispositions is completely missing from the repertoire of the person, then another disposition can compensate this. There is a real case actually that provides some evidence for this. The artist Eşref Arman, who's a Turkish artist who was born totally blind, he never seen the world in his life, but on the screen, on the right side of the screen, you see his art. He draws and paints pictures, 3 dimensions, shadows, everything, but he learned this by touching, only by touching. He uses color. So everybody will accept that seeing is the most essential disposition for the development and manifestation of artistic talent. But he doesn't have it, but it is compensated by his touching. So the consequence of accepting this proposition is this: no single disposition has the lion's share in giftedness. A specific disposition is not necessary for the manifestation of giftedness. The second component of the fuzzy conception of giftedness is stimulus conditions. So I will talk about the specification of stimulus conditions. Here, I will have 3 or 4 propositions that define stimulus conditions in the FCG model. First of all, let me repeat it. Giftedness exists in the interaction between personal dispositions and stimulus conditions. And remember that a corresponding stimulus condition is assumed to be sufficient to activate or stimulate manifestation of giftedness. Here, a stimulus is any situational variable. A stimulus condition is any situation state in which stimuli are organized and in which stimuli respond to reactions that come from a person. But we will see different kinds of stimuli. There are external stimuli and internal stimuli. Here, external stimuli exist in the environment outside of us. Internal stimuli are after effect of external stimuli. I can be stimulated by an external stimuli, and I can have that effect in my mind still, thinking about it. And some emotions that arise because of this thinking could be considered as internal stimuli, because I will do something else after these emotions. So there is also active stimuli and potential stimuli. There is an infinite number of stimuli in the environment, but they are not all active stimuli. In the FCG model, they are all considered accepted as potential stimuli. They have the potential to activate, to stimulate personal dispositions. And then if they activate or stimulate a personal disposition, they will be accepted as active stimuli. The first proposition that define stimulus conditions is: a stimulation is a personal experience. A stimulus in the environment is rather generic, but stimulation is not. Actually, stimulation is very unique and personal. Each of us will have a different stimulation when we interact with the same object. We will not have the same stimulation. And if we accept this, that stimulation is unique and personal, then we should ask these 2 questions for the education of gifted children or talent development. What kind of environment is conducive for giftedness or talent development? How is this child stimulated to engage in talent development? But in educational field, we mostly ask the first question. When we design a program for gifted children, when we do something education for them, we first ask what kind of environment is conducive, good for gifted children, for gifted students. But actually, we should ask, how is this child stimulated to engage in talent development? Because all children are not stimulated in the same way when they interact with the same, stimulation condition. So here, if we accept proposition 1, which is a stimulation is a personal experience, we should also accept these consequences. Stimulus, such as rich environment, loses its supremacy and stimulation becomes a major mechanism in talent development. The second proposition, a stimulus condition is a temporary antecedent, but not causally relevant to the manifestation of giftedness. Well, a stimulus condition is not necessary nor sufficient. It can be sufficient for the manifestation of giftedness, but the manifestation of giftedness can happen by or can be activated by any other stimulus conditions. This could be described, it is described in Innes condition by McKee and Ziegler and Heller some years ago. So here, no particular set of stimulus conditions causally relevant to giftedness. The same stimulation can be aroused by a completely different set of stimulus conditions. If you accept this proposition, this consequence is inevitable. No single environmental variable has supremacy in talent development. Proposition 3 about the specification of stimulus condition. Hierarchically organized stimulus conditions have the potential to reinforce talent development. Here in the model, stimulus conditions should be hierarchically organized to foster talent development, because hierarchically organized stimulus conditions increase the probability of the continuity of a behavior or adaptive interactions between person and the environment. If the stimulus conditions are not hierarchical, if they are non-hierarchical, this can cause discontinuity of a particular behavior. If the stimulus conditions are not hierarchical in gifted education, we can face both gifted students. Here, in some studies, it is found that one of the major findings, actually, underachieving gifted students say that they are not challenged in the classroom, in the school, so they get bored. Okay, we have come to the third component of the FCG model, which is interaction. I will talk about the specification analysis of interactions. Intelligence exists in person-situation interaction. It could be the same for giftedness. Giftedness manifests in efficient interactions. But how interactions should be? Efficient interactions should be progressive adaptations. And this could be achieved through progressive reproductions of interactions and adaptively maintaining these interactions. For the specification of interaction, FCG interaction, the first proposition is manifestations of giftedness entail higher order interactions. First of all, let me explain that giftedness is necessarily dependent on interactions between personal dispositions and stimulus conditions. Within personal dispositions, excuse me, and interactions of interactions. There are interactions also between personal dispositions, such as between intellective dispositions and non-intellective dispositions. But here, what is more important is the interactions of interactions. So the joint effect of multiple variables. In gift education, we usually consider the effect of intelligence, the effect of environment, let's say good schooling, good family environment, or good neighborhood. If the child has high intelligence and high motivation and good environment, we assume that this child will achieve very high. But that is not the case. The case is the interaction between personal dispositions or between the person and the stimulus conditions or the environment. I don't want to talk about the environment because it's a very broad concept, because child interacts with very little, very small things in the environment. So those are the things that kind of trigger a child's interest and curiosity. Here, in a higher order interaction, one or more variable affect the interaction between two or more variables. So there is, in the manifestation of giftedness, there is the interaction between intelligence and motivation. There is the interaction between intelligence and an environment. There is interaction between motivation and environment. But there is also a joint effect of all these variables that affect the interaction between two variables. So, and in many cases, especially in the development of giftedness and manifestation of giftedness, the joint effect of multiple variables is much greater than the sum of these variables, such as intelligence, creativity, good environment, and so on. So, accepting this proposition, we have the consequence that because the nature of giftedness is multiplicative, also the gifted manifestation of giftedness should be defined as the interaction of multiple variables. So high ability plus motivation plus good environment plus do not equal to high achievement. But we could say this if you take the multiplication of all these variables, the child might achieve excellence in a domain. The second proposition is interaction is initiated by non-intellective dispositions. Here, interaction is mediated and maintained by both intellective and non-intellective dispositions, as well as environmental conditions. But it is initiated by non-intellective dispositions. For example, to maintain these interactions continuously, the child might start a feedback loop using by her non-intellective dispositions. For example, let's say a child who is very curious and interested about speaking, a child, let's say 1 year old. And if she says one word, and the parents will see that, and parents will respond to the child's interest, curiosity, and then they will help the child to learn language and teach her a few words. Once child speaks a couple of words, then she will enjoy speaking, and maybe she will constructing some sentences. And upon this learning, probably parents will provide more feedback to the child. So there is the feedback loop between child's personal dispositions and the environment. But the interaction between between the child and the parents is started by the child's non-intellective disposition. In this case, it is the curiosity or interest of the child. But it could be maintained. It could be maintained by the environment and intellective dispositions. Here, I say interaction is initiated by non-intellective dispositions, but in some cases it could be initiated by intellective dispositions, but we have no proof about it. For example, when a child sees her caregiver, she might show some emotions. So here, memory could be the source of interaction here. If we accept this proposition, we will have this consequence to accept. Non-intellective dispositions may have a priority in talent development, but in gift education, we mostly have a priority for intellective dispositions, not intellective dispositions. The third proposition related to interaction, FCG interaction, is that interaction between person and environment requires evolutionary changes for talent development. Talent development resembles evolution. The evolution of species involves diversification and advance. Just like this, talent development also involves diversification and advance. But this talent development involves focused diversification and advancement. An efficient interaction for talent development should require two types of changes at the individual and environment level: focused diversification and advancement. Here, what I mean by focused diversification in individual, in person, or in the environment. Focused diversification refers to the learning, acquisition of the number of specialized skills and knowledge necessary for excellence in a domain, a talent domain. Advancement at the individual level means the growth of skills and knowledge at the upper level. Focused diversification, on the other hand, in environment, on the other hand, refers to the number of resources and opportunities in a specific talent domain. And the advancement in environment means the quality of all those resources and opportunities. Here, a child cannot be good mathematician without going through some certain steps. Let's say, for example, a child starts to do mathematics with your teacher during K-12 years, and then work with a mathematician in undergraduate studies, let's say. And after she graduates, she can work with a group of mathematicians in a research lab during her graduate studies. So she is continuously learning, acquiring the necessary skills and knowledge that is necessary for high mathematical ability. Also, she is also diversifying and focusing on the resources and advancing the resources in her environment. The last proposition related to interaction between personal dispositions and stimulus conditions. The magnitude of interactions in the construction of giftedness cannot be precisely estimated. Well, we know there's an interaction between personal dispositions and stimulus conditions, and but the magnitude of these interactions is indeterminable, and we don't even know how much the magnitude of interaction should be for the construction or manifestation of giftedness, because dispositions and stimuli or stimulus conditions enter into manifold interactions within and between groups. Dispositions interact with each other. Dispositions interact with environmental conditions, and there are also interactions between environmental conditions. All these higher order interactions contribute to the manifestation of giftedness. So, unique contribution of each disposition and environmental variable to the construction of giftedness cannot be precisely estimated due to all these multiplicity of interactions. Here, we will have a consequence of accepting this proposition. An intellective disposition, such as intelligence, is more important than other dispositions, such as motivation, task commitment, or others. This is not a valid proposition. So far, I tried to explicate the concept giftedness based on the fuzzy conception of giftedness. In the last 10 minutes, I will try to talk about the identification and education of gifted children based on FCG models, and then I will leave some probably 10 minutes for discussion. Identification, because according to fuzzy conception of giftedness, interaction matters. Personal dispositions matter. Stimulus conditions matter. But according to this model, there exists no necessity for a gift to be identified, because we don't even know the number of dispositions that involve in the construction of giftedness. And we know that we accepted that some dispositions can be compensated by some other dispositions. So measuring a child's intelligence to identify this child as a gifted is unnecessary from the point of view of the FCG model. No personal dispositions are necessary nor sufficient to be recognized as a cause of giftedness in this model. So there is no need for an identification. Actually, FCG suggests that there is no need for identification of gifted children, but selection of those who can develop efficient interactions with environmental conditions. FCG, according to FCG model, this could be achieved. The identification or selection of gifted children can be achieved through two-phase process. First should be the self-selection of environment. Second should be the adaptive retention. Here, when I say self-selection of environment, I say it's very simple. A gifted education program should be open to all children. Students who believe they have high ability in a subject domain, let's say in mathematics, science, or in a talent domain, and who has keen interest, and learning motivation in the program, in the subject area the program offers, should apply for the program. So this is self-choice of the child. Self-choice is important for talent development. But of course, this self-selection doesn't select all the fittest child. Some children make a wrong selection in the environment. This happens in evolution. If some of the students are not achieving very well in the program, if they do not have high learning motivation, no interest, they will most probably will not achieve in the program, and they will leave the program because they are not fitting the program. Or otherwise, they should be advised to find a better environment. I mean, an environment, education environment that match their their talent or learning characteristics. Here, there is always a misfit between the child and educational program, but this could be compensated by adaptive retention. If child does not fit the program, then the child can, should leave the program, or the program administrators, teachers, or whoever, they can advise the program. So this is a two-stage process. The first stage is self-selection, and the child joins the program, and there's an adaptive retention during the program. There is a advantage of using FCG model of identification or selection. Here, identification usually is a diagnosis. So diagnosis has to be true to have a not to have a mistake in the prescription. But in the FCG model, FCG selection, it is a selection is a search process of finding the fittest child, the right match. Identification suffers from the Sorites paradox because it has a threshold mostly. But FCG or selection is an approximation operating on probability. It doesn't say this child is gifted, this child is not gifted, but it shows some probability of being having some potential to be gifted if efficiently interacting with the environment. Because of this Sorites paradox also, identification leads to labeling. According to identification, there's an absolute truth, existence or not existence. A child is either gifted or not gifted. Selection avoids labeling as it operates on probability of partial existence. Identification overemphasizes on itself. It generates like-minded people, like selfish genes in evolution. If you use IQ tests, you will identify same kinds of children. But selection is a kind of selfless, being concerned with the diversification of talents in an educational program. The last one is identification may result in underachievement because there is not a match between students' choices and educational programs and students' types of talents and educational programs. And selection may lead to overachievement because it tries to make a perfect fit between the child and an educational program. In this environment, child will have higher interactions with the environment, and she might develop better, higher talents because of these efficient interactions. And the education based on the FCG model. First of all, let me state that the major goal of gifted education should be talent development. It should be through initiating an interaction between person and learning environment. This could be achieved through treatment interaction models, for example. And second, progressively adapting learning environment to progressive adaptations in personal dispositions. Here I am underlining that there should be a progressive adaptation in learning environment and progressive adaptations in personal dispositions. Here, this could be achieved through expertise reversal effect models based on acceleration and content enrichment strategies in gifted education. Let me focus on the second one a little bit more. Progressively adapting learning environment to progressive adaptations in personal dispositions. Two principles should be applied here. First, precedency of adaptations. And the second is level of adaptations. Environmental adaptations or stimulus adaptations in stimulus conditions should always precede corresponding adaptations in dispositions. And environmental adaptations should be advanced enough to maintain and boost interactions between the person, the child, and the stimulus condition. My conclusions here, my last slide. FCG, or Fuzzy Conception of Giftedness, is valid under certain boundary conditions. One will manifest and optimize giftedness as long as the interaction between person and environment is adaptively and progressively reproduced throughout life. Identification and education in gifted education should be strictly based on interaction models. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ursak, for the thoughtful and provocative presentation. We have so many questions. One of them is, how do you explain personal disposition? Where do these personal dispositions come from? Are they developmental or innate or both?
Well, personal dispositions, some are, of course, biological and inherited, and they grow throughout life, but some of them emerge after birth. Here in the model, I defined two types of dispositions, intellective dispositions and non-intellective dispositions. According to the model, for example, interest or curiosity is a disposition, is a personal disposition. So you could develop interest in something in sciences, for example, in doing a kind of arts later in your life. So you don't have to have necessarily all these dispositions when you are a child. So all the dispositions can be developed throughout life through education, but actually by efficient interactions. So even if child is born with insufficient dispositions in early childhood, let's say average intelligence. Intelligence could be one of the dispositions among numerous dispositions, for example. This child still could be with average intelligence, could be still gifted, still could be develop very high special talent later in her life, because manifestation and development of giftedness is multiplicative. So it is multitrack. There are multiple, ways of manifestations of giftedness. I hope this explanation a little bit clarifies the question.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Do you view that the non-hierarchical stimulus condition may be ameliorated with appropriate acceleration when gifted individuals demonstrate mastery? Would your fuzzy conception of giftedness differ in the online virtual educational environment?
Well, here what I'm saying is, in gifted education, we try to, make our education actually instruction hierarchical. We do it. If we have gifted children in a special program, we do it. But I'm here talking about a regular education program. There is one child, let's say one child in a classroom with 30, other children. Most of the instruction will be a repetition for the child, for the gifted child. As long as child learns knowledge which is necessary for the acquisition of a certain skill, then then the next level of instruction should be presented for the child. Otherwise, this repetition will result in replicators. replicators is like those genes that generate themselves all the time. So it could lead to boredom in the for this child. So hierarchy in stimulus conditions is necessary for maintaining efficient interaction with the environment. If it is not hierarchically organized, the efficiency of interaction will go down.
Okay. But what means does one establish the efficient interactions?
Okay. Efficient interaction means later, actually, because of the times when I couldn't explain everything, all the concepts there, efficient interaction means adapting the interaction, progressive adaptations in personal dispositions, adaptation in personal dispositions, and also progressive adaptations in environment here. We are interacting with the stimulus conditions, for example, to learn something, to develop a talent, but these interactions should be progressive. When we acquire a certain level of skill necessary for talent development, then we should move to the next level, and then the next level. So we are kind of progressively adapting the learning environment or stimulus condition. But at the same time, we should also have a higher interest when we go up a little bit to the talent. When we are acquiring the skills necessary for talent, we should also increase the interest, learning motivation in us. So there is a progressive adaptation in our personal dispositions as well, not just in the environment. So if we can achieve this, if we can, progressively adapt our personal dispositions to the environment, and also progressively adapt the personal environment to our personal dispositions, then there is efficient interaction between person and environment.
Okay. And one last question. Motivation and interest, are these the efficient drivers?
Well, motivation, interest, or similar, constructs, they are not efficient. Here, they are not necessary. They are not sufficient. But in a particular case of the manifestation of giftedness, motivation here could be one of the necessary components, right? But motivation is not necessary for another child to show the same level of giftedness. So here I am saying I try not to show any particular disposition as the necessary and sufficient condition of giftedness. Because during my presentation, I sometimes underline that no personal disposition has a lion's share. No personal disposition is necessary nor sufficient for manifestation of giftedness, because they could be compensated by other dispositions. Even intelligence could be, for example, I am just assuming, if child has a average level of intelligence, that could be compensated by hard work, motivation, interest, learning motivation, right? In a multiplicative, model of giftedness.
Okay. Well, there are other so interesting questions, but maybe these people could contact Dr. Sack for answer their questions. Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much, Dr. Ugur, for your presentation. And also, we'd like to thank the Dodi Mahoney Center for Gift Education for sponsoring this presentation. I thank you all for attending the third day of our conference, and I will come you back for the final day of our conference, and starting at 10 a.m. Central Time. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Have a great day, a great evening. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you all the participants of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children Conference. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great evening.
Thank you.